Today, or rather yesterday, was the third day of the IEM 10 World Championship for Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and it was held at the Spodek Arena in Katowice, Poland. And the day ended, actually today, the following day, in the early hours of the morning, around 3:30 a.m. local time, with an almost empty crowd who didn't watch Fnatic versus Astralis because they'd gone home, who didn't watch Luminosity versus Na'Vi, arguably the game of the year so far in CSGO, because they'd gone home. And the majority of them went home after the Virtus.pro versus Fnatic quarterfinal, which was the second best of three of the day, and there was 4 best of threes over the day. That's the scenario we were left in the end. Now, the reason why I said today rather than yesterday initially there is because that day, day 3, only ended now. It ended around 3:30 a.m. local time, 2:30 a.m. for me in the UK. And as a result of that, you have to consider that that means probably the earliest the players who finished the last match could be in bed, going to sleep, is about 4:30 a.m. And if it's Fnatic players, they have the final to play tomorrow. Now, admittedly, the final's at 7 p.m. local time, so they'll have time to sleep. For the casters, that means some of the casters have literally worked essentially a 15-hour day and might have even been awake for 20 hours in the day, and themselves will have to be there tomorrow, maybe earlier than that to prepare, to go over things, maybe to do a rehearsal. Now, let's address all these issues. First of all, in terms of playing so late, for the players to have to play that late, especially in an important semi-final, is so unacceptable. It's ridiculous. Like, you cannot be expected to focus, have full performance level at that point in time. When you've been up for that point in time, you might have even not had all your set food for the day. So you might be running out of food, or you might have to load up again. You might have already had caffeine during the day. All these issues that shouldn't be a factor when you're playing at the highest level, deep in a tournament when the match is the most important. Like, get scheduling issues fucked up, have that happen in the group stage. Don't have it happen in the most important matches. It's also not as simple as saying, right, yeah, well, even if you are Fnatic, yeah, you might have gone to bed at 4:30 a.m. local time, but, you know, you got over 12 hours to sleep. That's not the way the body's sleep cycle works. That's not the way your circadian rhythm works. Go and look into it. As someone who's been to many countries around the world, sometimes I get there, and because of the jet lag, yeah, I have a 12-hour span I could sleep in, but because my body's already gone through part of the time when it should be asleep, maybe I go to sleep and my body just wakes up after 5 hours and I can't go back to sleep. Now, you can try sleeping pills, you can try yoga, meditation, you can try all these things and you might get some results, but for most people, it goes without saying, they're simply not going to get the sleep except for within, say, a certain 10-hour period that they need to, and if they're starting at 4:30 a.m. in the morning local time, they're simply not going to get that sleep. Bearing in mind, for the rest of the week, they might have been up at 7 to go to the event for the group first days, etc., etc. Likewise for the casters. Some of these casters, especially the ones who have trouble sleeping, might get 3 or 4 hours sleep now. That's just unacceptable. In terms of casters, it is unacceptable to have to work that long. These guys might have had to work 15 hours, as in they started the first game 15 hours ago, and then they finished this one now 15 hours after that. You have to remember, these are guys where it might not seem to normal people like, well, I work an 8-hour day. Yeah, you work an 8-hour day where you go to an office. And when you're at the office, sometimes you have a break, and sometimes you slack off a bit, and sometimes you do some hard part work, then you do the easier part of the work. These guys, in theory, have to do these bursts where they're on, and they're judged totally independently, as though that one moment there was all that existed, and no one knows how long they've been awake, where they are in the world, what sleep they've had, what food they've had. They're just judging them on everything they say there as if that was their best ever possible performance. And they have to be on. They have to be funny, they have to be insightful, they have to have great analysis, they have to coherently put together their thoughts, analyse a game, articulately explain it. So when it's been 15 hours when they've had to come back over and over again, and some of them who aren't doing the games, remember, have to keep watching the games during their breaks, they're not getting proper breaks, and the food might not be so great if it's catered to an event like is often the case in esports. So it's ridiculous for me that people have to work this sort of amount of time. Even beyond about 10 hours, I think is pretty unreasonable. Beyond 12, ridiculous. 15, say, utterly unacceptable. In any context. Not only that, but remember, when these people make a little mistake, a little slip-up, that might be watched in a VOD for years to come with no one knowing the context. That might be mercilessly taunted and picked apart for a tiny little error, saying the wrong player name or saying the wrong event or something, and people are like, oh, this guy doesn't know anything about Counter-Strike. These people's reputations are on the line here, and they're not able to be at their best because of the circumstances they're put in, which are inhuman circumstances to work under. Now, part of the reason why this has happened is the schedule that IEM has used, ESLs. So they scheduled 4 best of 3s on day 3 yesterday, which was The 2 quarterfinal games, because obviously the winners of the group skip to the semi-finals. There only are 2 quarterfinal games. 2 quarterfinal games, and then the 2 semi-finals. Now, here's the worst part. This day already went way over schedule and lasted way longer than it should have. And of the 4 best of 3s that were played, 2 of them were 2-0s. So basically, if these 4 best of 3s had all gone to 3 maps, had all gone long, maybe even had a couple of overtimes, this thing could have ended 7 a.m. local time, 8 a.m. local time, 9 a.m. local time. This could really have happened. It could have been even worse. This wasn't the worst case scenario, which tells you that there's something wrong with the schedule. Now, technical delays are one thing. And that's something where you come out and you explain what technical delays are, and we understand those happen, and they happen frequently for many events, actually. But this looks to me like the schedule, even on paper, was never going to work. So I went back and I looked into past ESL events of this magnitude. Because to me, I speculate that this is just greed on ESL's part, wanting to run too many games in one day and praying it all goes well, and it hasn't. And then afterwards, only now realizing it was wrong, when you could have known from day one, 4 best of 3s is too many to have in a day. Because remember, in theory, in a nightmare world, each map can last an hour, especially for setup time, warm-up time, switching between maps. Each map can last an hour. So you're saying that's 12 hours, potentially, just in the 4 best of 3s if they all go 3 maps. Forgetting extra time for analysis, breaks between games when someone's played a game before, and then they have to play a game a little bit later and go and have food. So there's no way. You're already making it so 12 hours is possible on the schedule. So I went and looked at past ESL events. So last year, ESL 1 Katowice 2015, which was a major. This one isn't, even though it has similar structure. Last year, when it was the major, they had, from the quarterfinals, they had 3 best of 3s a day on. So they have 3 of the quarterfinals, then the last quarterfinal, I think it was NIP TSM, played with the 2 semifinals the next day, and so there was 3 best of 3s the day after that for the semis and 1 of the quarterfinals, and then the final was on a day on its own. I think that's a great setup, actually. That looked like it worked very well, and that seems much better than this one, because in that scenario, remember, you could still have had 9 hours or more, just if they'd gone 3 maps and all scenarios there. So I think that even has a risk involved with it, but it's much better than this one. Now, a downside, obviously, I will admit, is that a quarterfinal then has to be played that someone who's going to play on the semi as well. That is a downside, but I'd rather that than have some of the other games be lower quality because people are playing at 3 a.m. ESL 1 Cologne, which is in August of 2015, had 3 best of 3s for the quarterfinals. Let me think. Was that 3 for the quarterfinals? Let me double check, actually. I'll just double check, so I don't want to get this wrong. I'm trying to think what it was. Let's have a look. Let's see. Worth checking, I think. Let's have a look. ESL 1 Cologne 2015. I think it was 3 for the quarterfinals. We'll double check anyway. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, actually, ESL 1 Cologne had all 4 quarterfinals played on one day. But here's the key thing. First of all, because they were all quarterfinals, they were all different teams playing. So you never needed any special break for a team to play a quarterfinal, then come back and play a semi-final, because it was only quarterfinals. So that helps in itself. And here's the reason why it worked at ESL 1 Cologne. All the games ended up being 2-0s. So there wasn't a third map ever. You only had 8 maps for the whole day. And on top of that, 3 of the 8 maps that were played were close. Only 3. Beyond 3, you had one that was like a 16-10, and then the rest were all reasonably comfortable wins. So that's almost the best case scenario. And yet when I look on a website as to what time the last best of 3 started for that, when they played 4, the last one started at 9:20 local time, which even with a short series itself is running the risk of being way over time, ending something like 11:30, 12 o'clock, midnight. And that's with everything going to plan and that being a short series. There should only be, I think, a maximum of 3 best of 3 a day. I would even prefer, if we could, to go to 2 best of 3 so that you never play more than 1 best of 3 in a day as a player. And you can have space between to do analysis and have breaks and have food and all the rest of it. You're not rushed, and then you don't have to worry about it going crazy. Because remember, that could still be 6 to 8 hours itself for 2 best of 3s. And you just add an extra day if you can. Now, there's another factor at play here, which is IEM schedules their events, so they're not just a CSGO event here. They do CSGO, they do StarCraft 2, and they do League of Legends. So they're scheduling the 2 biggest games of CSGO and League of Legends. So they're scheduling League of Legends and CSGO at the same event, at the same venue. So as a result, the way they've scheduled it this time is that IEM for League of Legends started a day later and ends a day later. So their final is on Sunday. CSGO's final is today, which is Saturday. So on different days. Now, the question I then have to ask myself when CSGO has been crammed into one day and has had these massive scheduling problems, I have to look and I have to say, does that mean that they did it this way so that CSGO was on its own separate day and they were kind of greedy and they crammed in the days as opposed to scheduling out properly and imagining the two games as separate entities, which they are, and have different fan bases? So IEM League of Legends gets Sunday to itself. So did CSGO get compromised for League of Legends? Now, if so, I can't find it hard to have a lot of sympathy for ESL in this scenario, because obviously they have an extra day at the venue, which they're going to use for League of Legends. So they could have put CSGO then. They've chosen not to. So as a result, it's hard to feel as much sympathy for them. Also, by the way, a little birdie told me that's one of the reasons why IEM Katowice 2015 is not a major this year. Because I can understand why Valve, when you're putting on a world championship, don't really like it when you take their world championship and you go, yeah, world championship. I'm just going to ram that in the same building at the same dates as another championship, which is my world championship for a different game. And yeah, you can get to be one of the games, but your world championship is just an equal event to that and takes time and shares the stages up. I wouldn't particularly like that if I was Valve. So as a result, if I'm Valve, I'd say, you know what? My World Championship is a standalone event. I don't want you fucking with the schedule or doing anything that compromises the quality of my World Championship to help another game. Especially one that in the past, like League of Legends and Riot Games, has been a bigger supporter of you and helped you out more. So you might feel more affinity towards. How convenient. So this also plays into the fact that ESL as a company have tended to have a tendency to be cheap and to be greedy and try and stack in days and try and stack in events and try and stack in teams and overwork people and ram the schedule, whether that's casters, players, and just try and make it so that if it goes perfectly, it'll fit in the schedule. If it doesn't, it's a shame. We're sorry about that. We'll try to make it better for next year. Definitely won't change anything. Definitely won't book an extra day at the venue. Definitely won't change the fucking format so that it's like 2 or 3 best of these in there. Won't do that. Make it worse, in fact. Katowice now has a worse schedule than Katowice did last year in terms of these best of threes. It's gotten worse. Greed. There's also the fact that Carmack even said at the end of the day, or towards the end of the day, when someone made a Reddit thread about this, something along the lines of like they had learned from this experience that, like, shorter days are needed. That's just pandering to the crowd. Like, remember, you had shorter days in the past. It's gotten worse now. It's not that you started off with 7 best of threes in a day, now you come down to 6, and now you're at 4, and you're like, well, got to keep going shorter, guys. You are figuring it out, though. No, you've gotten worse. You've made a bad decision, actually, over the time. So the idea that they really have just learned now, like 15 years into doing esports tournaments or whatever, that shorter days are better and you don't run into schedule problems, don't buy it. I'm sorry, that seems just like pandering to the crowd. I do not buy that. You didn't realise that until this moment when it all went to shit, and by the way, could have gone even worse. Now, it's also an issue we have to address that the crowd left the arena after the first 2 best of threes. So the 2 semi-finals of what was a massive event and could have been one of the events of the year, and in terms of some of the games was left with almost no crowd watching them. And no crowd as a result impacting the players, making them more nervous. No crowd to cheer for players when they won things or when they came out onto the stage. And so that whole cool atmosphere that had been created at the past events in Poland for IEM wasn't there for the semi-finals of the fucking huge tournament with some of the best teams of all time playing. Now that really sucks, if you ask me. It also sucks in as much as, unfortunately, one of the conclusions people will draw, which I think has some merit to it, is that it's the nationalism issue, which is that the Polish fans came to watch Virtus.pro play, and when Virtus.pro lost to Fnatic, and not just lost, but in humiliating fashion, getting utterly brutalised on the sides of the maps they shouldn't have been, that fans were just like, you know what, I came to watch Virtus.pro, I'm a Polish fan, don't give a fuck about this Fnatic team, not going to stay to watch the other teams, fuck it, I'm going home, and therefore the crowd was almost empty. That is very sad if that's the case, and I think there was some element of that involved in it. Now, I will say, people are going a bit too far with the nationalism aspect. It's not just that people there only care about Virtus.pro and don't care about the others. I haven't obviously been to these tournaments in the past at IEM, but the stories I've heard and things I've seen watching the stream and hearing the fans chanting, I have seen at past IEM Katowice events, going back to the one in 2013, that they did cheer for teams from other countries. And even when teams from other countries sometimes beat or played well against their team, they would cheer for rounds and they would cheer for plays. And in general, they did a pretty good job of cheering for the opponent as well. And as a result, being quite reasonable, I thought. So I don't think you can just put this all on nationalism and make out like the crowd itself is shit, even though it sucks that they left and didn't just like tough it out and try and wait longer. There's also a factor that, based on a couple of Reddit comments, the arena themselves didn't let people back in when they'd left if it was after 9 p.m, when obviously these games lasted like 5 hours more. Now that is ridiculous. Like, this comment here said, I was there and it is a fucking joke. Of course, almost everyone was waiting for Virtus.pro Fnatic, but on Na'Vi Tempo Storm, which was the game before, was full. As you know, this match ended 2 hours after Virtus.pro was supposed to start. To that moment, everything was okay. Shit hits the fan after Virtus.pro Fnatic match. After that, huge amount of people went to the city to eat something as fast as possible. Brackets, they were selling just shitty cold as fuck hot dogs. And go back to watch the last 2 matches. So people tried to come back to watch the last 2 matches. I did this with my friend as well. We ate hamburgers, and when we tried to come back, security guys on entrance said there is no fucking chance to enter the Spodek. We went to the guy who was in charge of this tournament, and he said they made a decision to close entrances earlier. So according to this, ESL's choice not to allow people back in for the crowd who wanted to come back, despite all the problems and disadvantages and having been up for so long. They wanted to come back, and you guys wouldn't let them in. Let me see. Decision to close entrances earlier. Because there is not enough interest of the audience to watch the event. Now, really huge amount of that audience is going around and trying to enter this tournament, but there is no fucking chance. They closed everything, and crying there is no fucking interest. Good job. Now, and then the guy later says, edit, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I have ticket for 3 days and I couldn't enter. He said that they are allowed to do things like that and we should read the rules of the tournament. Of course, nobody warned us when we were leaving the venue. So that's classic ESL, by the way. When something's fucked up, rather than just go, yeah, it is fucked up, like I'm looking to change it, just go, read the rules. It's all the small print, mate. Listen, just do my job. Brilliant, right? Now, what's interesting about this, though, is Carmack made a tweet 9 hours ago, so long before this problem happened, saying, in case, there's a typo, but I'll correct it. In case we run late, no one is leaving unless they want to, hashtag IEM. Except, he's technically right. If you just stayed in the venue and never left, you'd be okay. Problem with that is, how do you go and get food? You have to go and eat these shit hot dogs over like, what, an 8-hour span? Just only shit cold hot dogs. So if you want to go and get actual food and want to come back in, that's when they don't let you in, and they say it's because there's not enough interest, even though according to these comments, people wanted to get back in. So Carmack's comment there is, on one level, perhaps true, on the most factual, most specific, pedantic level, but it's kind of disingenuous unless he didn't know about the scenario. And if he's a head person running it, how does he not know about something like this, like the security issues? And if he doesn't know, why is he tweeting about it? Why is he telling everyone it's fine? I mean, if I read that comment there, I would actually think it is okay to go and then come back and it's okay, we're going to let people in still. And so that's what I would take from that. Apparently not. And this wasn't communicated to people when they left. Now, listen, some events in other countries kick people out after stuff like 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. because whatever, health and safety, fire restrictions, like the venue doesn't have insurance past that point. There's all these weird reasons to why they do it in some countries. I know at Gfinity G3, the first Gfinity event for CSGO, this was a problem. People were starting to get kicked out after 10 p.m. I think at Star Series, the one we had in Belarus, in Minsk, I think there was like a curfew for people who were under the age of 18 beyond a certain point in time. So for some of the Na'Vi games, they never got to see the game. They had to leave the venue. So that's not good, and I don't blame ESL entirely for that if that had been the case. But it doesn't sound like that is the case yet. So that's the problem. I certainly think it's ridiculous to expect people to go without getting food, or only give them the option of quite terrible food and having to essentially stay locked inside the fucking arena for like 12 hours. Now, for the Polish fans who were implying that everyone there is a kid or has work tomorrow or has to get up early, that doesn't quite cut it, I'm afraid. If this really was like the one massive tournament for esports in your country over the year, you'd tough it out like someone would at a concert that starts late or at a festival or in some scenario like that. They would just go through it because you want to see that incredible game. Like I wanted to see Luminosity versus Na'Vi. Obviously one of the fucking games of the year, an incredible matchup every time they play each other. The idea that you would go, well, because this guy's young, yeah, we shouldn't stay and watch the match. That doesn't entirely pass me. I get it as a reason in general, as an excuse, but it doesn't all work. And definitely not everyone watching esports events has kids or is working on a fucking Saturday. Don't be ridiculous. Now, one of the problems with this whole issue with the crowd and DSL is that the tickets for this event were free. It was free entrance for all the days when they were in the Spodek, when it was actually the playoffs, etc. Now, the problem here is that payment was only for tickets that got you early access, and only a few people did that. So as a result, there were people waiting for the free tickets because they know it's like first come, first serve to get into the venue. There were people waiting, supposedly, ESL themselves even bragged about this in tweets, from 6 a.m. onwards, which does show that they really want to see these games, they want to come early and show they're the ones that get in, they don't want to miss this chance. That's all great stuff, and as a result, that's why ESL was bigging it up. The problem is, because the tickets were free, that's why people are waiting at 6 a.m. If you have a ticket already and you know the games start at 11, you might come at 10, 10:30, you cruise in. Then if it goes to about midnight, you still got a bit of legs under you. If you're there from 6 a.m. and the games end at 3:30 a.m., you're going to have gone home long before that. You're going to be well tired before that. You're going to be absolutely knackered before that. You've been eating fucking shitty hot dogs all day. And what's the reason you've been there for 6 a.m.? Because unless you bought the early entrance, you were going for the free entrance. And as a result, you're going to be more tired and it's more likely you will leave, especially if then your favourite team loses and get utterly smashed and you don't care about the games coming up. So in a way, ESL's decision is what's then led to the fans making those decisions that might have been bad decisions for them in general as well. Now, this whole issue is also one of my problems with ESL and the way they always hype this event. Now, what's funny is this literally ties into the key point I was trying to make in that epic Unfiltered, Unfiltered 43, where I made my comments about Katowice for the 2014 one, the one that Virtus.pro won, right before I was going to travel there the next day, and obviously I was removed from the casting at crew, and I've never worked with ESL since. I probably never will again. What's funny is the point I was trying to make, beyond the jokes and some comments that may or may not have been factually accurate about Poland, some of them seem quite factually accurate. I'm not certain about one of the other ones about football. We'd have to see about that. Now, what the original point I was making and getting at was they always mentioned this event and hyped it with purposely occluding, not including, ignoring, skirting around the context that it's a free event to enter. That it's the entrance is free. It's quite possible that ESL gets a special deal on the stadium, or the stadium might even be free for them. And it's not even in the biggest Polish city or the capital. It's in a smaller Polish city, likely due to a deal to get the free stadium and therefore be able to offer free tickets. And that all these factors combined is helping it have this massive packed out crowd all the time, and have a crowd who seems super into it, and have a crowd that you can't really replicate often in other Western countries. Mainly because you have to pay to go to those stadiums. And so all those facts are there, but it's never mentioned. What they do instead is they hype it as though it's the best example, the pinnacle of an incredible, passionate esports crowd who really care about the game and have created this magical atmosphere that you just don't get anywhere else. It's hit a mainstream level in Poland in this one specific place for some weird reason, but in big Western countries, it just doesn't happen. They're just not into esports, I guess, in the same way, right? But here's the problem. Because it's free, because you get the stadium for that, because it's a smaller it's not the same as if you booked out Cowboy Stadium and everyone had to pay $100 a ticket or $300 a ticket to get in. If you then sell that out, that's way more impressive, and that's more like a real sport. There's a reason why UFC events can have like 30,000 people go there, and the gate, as in how much money they've made off tickets going in, can be like $2 million. Because the tickets cost a fuckload and you have to pay to get in. There's no motherfucker getting in free there. And what I don't like about the way that's billed, this was never even about Poland, by the way, is that I didn't like the way the implication you can draw from it when they don't add in that context, and you don't know the context of why Poland's having a more crowd and better experience like that than some of the Western countries, is that it actually does carry an implication that the fans are not as good in other countries, that they don't have the same passion for the game, they don't care about it as much, and you know, there's not the same magic and atmosphere when they're there. I found that quite disgusting, actually. And so it's not actually something specific against Poland, which I don't think is a very good country in the context of the whole world, but it's the idea that you just like, essentially you're just shitting on whatever, France, you're shitting on Germany, you're shitting on the USA. I mean, this is a ridiculous scenario. It was free to get into IEM Katowice. You had to pay money to get into fucking IEM San Jose. This is a totally ridiculous scenario. So anyway, let's consider what happened at this event, and now let's consider another event ESL ran, a very good event, ESL 1 Cologne, 2015, August last year. Now, when you consider the context of what happened at this tournament, let's consider what happened with the crowd there. The crowd there paid for their tickets to enter. They were into all the games. Yeah, they booed, but even then, people have made the point, which could be reasonable because it was the Virtus.pro Fnatic game, that maybe most of the booing was from people who were Polish Fnatic fans who travelled there. That could be the case. I don't know myself. There was some booing, but we can look past that. And you know what? They didn't even have an elite local team to support. Mouse Sports was the best team at the time and were like a top 10 team, but they went out in the group stage, and that was before all the sick games, basically. They didn't have a Virtus.pro, a team that has won many tournaments and always has that little special chance to maybe win the tournament, and as a result, fans might go just to support nationalistically. So I've got to say, props to the fucking Cologne crowd. They've shown themselves so far to maybe be the best crowd in esports. Swedish crowds always have a team in the fucking final. Crowds from like Ukraine have like Navi, or they have in the past the Virtus.pro guys when they were the Hellraisers players like Dosia and all the rest of them. In the USA, they at least have loads of NA people to support and the streamers and all that. Got to give it up to the Cologne crowd in that sense. Now, here's the question. Does this mean, we should never hold events in Poland and we should never have a major then? No, obviously not. The place, Katowice, has a great history of having really good events there. Some of the best games of all time in every single event. 2013, they had an amazing League of Legends tournament there where Gambit won over these Korean teams. 2014, you had that incredible run from Virtus.pro to win the major and only drop one map along the way and be gods on Mirage. Then you had... let me think what else. Katowice 2015 was obviously the one where Fnatic won their first major with this lineup and Olafmeister emerged as this dominant player. So incredible stuff. There's been some fantastic tournaments there. They should definitely hold tournaments there again. I'd even be in favour of holding a major there again, as long as they can kind of stop fucking up the Valve thing and actually hold the CSGO tournament independent of the other tournaments and not just like put it all under the Intel banner and try and like save money on the fucking sponsorship or whatever by booking out all the stuff in that way and like sharing a venue and all this like fucking cheap lame ass like cost saving measures for fucking world championship level events. I think there should be more tournaments there. I think most of this fuck up lies on ESL's back. Even the Polish crowd problems I think are largely just a knock on from ESL's fuck ups. I don't really blame the Polish people like that. I do think unfortunately that the way a lot of the backlash came from Polish fans, like saying it wasn't their fault, was like a bit distasteful and implying that like everyone has a case there and absolutely nothing's to blame from them at all. Like, yeah, I don't quite buy that, because if it was this magical place and you were that into esports, I think some of you would have stayed more. Or obviously in the case of getting kicked out, there's not much you can do there. But I have to say, as a general trend, here's something interesting I've noticed over my many years. I've been following esports in terms of working in the industry for 15 years, and I followed esports as games for closing on 20 years, from about like 98 onwards. So let's say like 18 years. I have to say what's interesting is I've noticed a lot of the organizational issues and the cultural issues in esports actually mirror issues in society in itself. So one of the things I've learned from knowing a lot of Polish people and seeing the way Polish people react to things, these guys cannot ever accept that anything they ever did is wrong. There's always an excuse. It's always not their fault. It's always someone else's fault. Even if that other person themselves is Polish, but then they'll never acknowledge that as a Polish problem. They'll just use that like no true Scotsman fallacy of like, oh, he's not a real Pole then. Like the real ones were like this. And so as a result, it's never anything their fault politically. There's just corrupt politicians. Wait a minute, aren't they Polish politicians? No, they're yeah, but they're not real. Like they're just corrupt and stuff, and we've never been given a chance. Blah 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 blah. Like they never will accept anything's their fault. Likewise, in other countries, similar problems. So in the UK, my country, one of the big problems we have in the UK is that things tend to be very poorly executed in terms of plans. And so what happens is when you actually run the plan, it won't be on time and things will run late, famously with all public transport, with lots of different event type things will be late, they'll be slightly poor in the execution of how they actually carried out. People who aren't competent for the job will be assigned to a key post that they'll fuck up. Bureaucracy especially will weigh things down, and you'll have all these fire and health and safety things that'll stop enough people being allowed in the venue, and then you won't be allowed to have like 10 people stood near a chair in case a light bulb goes, all these like mad things like that, which are problems in the UK culture. And then you'll have the scenario where it'll be overpriced because they want to gouge people on how much they think it's worth, and all sorts of problems like that. In America, they always try to blow the event up way too large, and companies overreach like what their grasp can actually manage, and they try to put all the money in and get the events bigger and bigger and bigger and make it the biggest event ever, and then some of them end up going bust, or it's underwhelming, or it doesn't live up to the hype. There's all these problems in all different countries in all these different respects. So it's not the case that Poland's to blame for this. It's definitely not the case we shouldn't have tournaments there. It's a wicked place to have tournaments, but there've been massive problems. A lot of them stem from ESL, and the way IEM's structured in terms of the tournament, and as a tournament organizer, having League of Legends and StarCraft 2 and CSGO all under one roof, and not living in the modern era of having standalone events. And so you can see how this whole clusterfuck, a lot of it could have been avoided. Now, some of it maybe couldn't have. Maybe the games would have lasted long anyway. Maybe there would have been technical delays. Maybe the crowd would have had to leave because of having kids or waking up tomorrow. Lots of things might have gone wrong, but the clusterfuck is because of many things that could have been avoided and should be avoided, and definitely in the future should be avoided. Now then, if you want to play fantasy esports and you don't want to have to pay to enter, you can pay to enter Alpha Draft contests, but you can also enter free to enter contests. And you know what? You don't need a crowd of people for that. You can just enter yourself, have fun. The atmosphere will be fun for you. You can play different contests. You can play League of Legends. You can play CSGO. There's multiple games at once if you want different contests for IEM, etc. You can play all this stuff at Alpha Draft and win 6 Grilla. And you don't have to eat a shitty cold hot dog or blame things not on your nationality.